All right, and now we're going to have Ian speak on compliance.
Hello. I'm not sure if you can tell by the way I speak, but I am not from Quebec. My name is Ian, and I'm here to give you a talk on compliance this afternoon. So now that we've all had bread and pasta salad and the temperature's coming up, my two objectives are to keep you awake and hopefully to give you some insight here about how compliance can help strengthen and improve your security program, and how it doesn't have to be something that you dread or dislike, and something you can actually use to your benefit. So a little bit about me. My name is Ian MacMillan. I'm a Senior Manager in Cyber Risk and Compliance at M&P Digital. I'm also a co-founder of Beauceron Security, so for anybody that knows about Beauceron, I'm not the person that personally sends you phishing simulations. I built a product that does that. And yeah, my background is in software development, so originally started as a developer. I've worked on security tools like QRadar. If you use the DSM editor, I did some work on the DSM editor, the log source management app, that's me. You can blame me for that one. Originally, my career in development was in UI and UX and front end. And I actually bring a lot of those skills from my UI UX background into my security career. So I did do full stack. My preference was UI UX. And I really believe, I'm a really strong believer in the common sense approach and usable security controls. Implementing security in an organization in a way that does not create friction for end users and the people that are trying to use it on a daily basis. And so I've brought it, taken it upon myself to try and hopefully change your perception about compliance and how that doesn't necessarily have to be something that's difficult or causes friction for you as practitioners in industry. In my current role, I'm a PCI QSA. So a lot of my role now is consulting to help clients develop a PCI compliance program. So if you're not familiar, a PCI QSA is Payment Card Industry Qualified Security Assessor. So it's credit card security compliance. And yeah, I help organizations achieve compliance with PCI. I also assess organizations, so I do things like SAQ validations, like self-assessment questionnaire validations, report on compliance assessments as well, from organizations that are small mom and pop shops or local startups, right up to household brands like telcos and couriers and municipalities and governments. And yeah, before I was in consulting at M&P with Beauceron Security, we built a tool that did security awareness. So when I'm not doing, PCI, ISO 27001 readiness, risk management, risk assessment, stuff like that, I actually lead our national security awareness practice at M&P as well. And so I help organizations build out security awareness programs and implement tooling and kind of best practices around that. And at Beauceron Security, prior to joining M&P, that was a big part of my role as well. So real focus on people and implementation of controls and helping improve security posture with awareness. Just a little bit about M&P. So we're founded in 1958. We're a fully born and bred Canadian firm. We've got about 8,200 employees. Our core business originally was in accounting. So Myers, Norris, and Penny is actually what it stands for. And we have a digital subsidiary, which is M&P Digital. It's about 500 employees that does sort of end-to-end IT consulting. So we're all over the country. We do all kinds of stuff, a little bit of everything in IT consulting. And I belong to the bottom right corner there, which is the cybersecurity and privacy team and all the stuff we do related to that. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about what information security compliance actually is. I mean, we all know it's checklists and controls that we are assessed against or audited on. We're going to talk a little bit about some examples. I'm going to talk about PCI DSS and ISO 27001, and I promise it will be engaging. It won't be boring. We're going to talk about how you can leverage these sorts of standards and frameworks, these compliance standards, to improve your security program. Practical ways, tangible examples of how you can take something like PCI DSS or ISO 27001, even if it's not something that you're subject to or you're assessed on, you can use it to improve the posture of your program and make your organization more secure. And then we've got some practical examples and takeaways. So I did take some excerpts directly from those standards. Maybe there's people in here that haven't had the opportunity to look at those, or you're not like me and nerd out on reading those kinds of standards in your spare time. So I'll be able to kind of show you what that looks like, give you the QSA's perspective on what kind of PCI controls or requirements can do for you, and then give you the ISO perspective as well. So just before I start here, raise of hands, how many people are involved or are running a compliance program for some kind of assessment in your organization? Okay, a few. Okay, leave your hands up for a second. Put your hand down if you do not enjoy it. Yeah, okay, it's all right, you can be honest, it's okay. Yeah, I think that's really the common experience that I have as an assessor, as a QSA, right? The room falls silent when the QSA enters during an audit. I often feel like I should be wearing a cloak and carrying a big scythe or something like that. But yeah, so compliance often has this sort of negative connotation, this audit sort of mindset where somebody external is going to come into our organization, and we have to do all this work and prep and build up to lead to this point, this sort of pinnacle, this crux where we're under a microscope for a certain amount of time, you know, when we're just trying to do our day-to-day jobs. So at sort of like the ground level here, I want to talk about what information security compliance actually is. What's the objective? So information security compliance is sort of made up of 6 key elements. The first one is to protect data, right? We're trying to protect data in our organizations, and the purpose of these standards, you know, whether it's credit card information with PCI, or it's our information security program and management with ISO, or any other number of standards and frameworks that you're subject to compliance on. The ultimate goal is to protect the information and the assets of your organization. The second one is to mitigate risks. So similar to the talk earlier today about risk management, ultimately the purpose of implementation and controls and being assessed on those on a regular basis is to cut down on the chances of somebody actually compromising those assets of our organization. Meeting regulatory requirements, of course, so you know, Visa and MasterCard and Amex and JCB and Discover, they decide that if you're going to transact cardholder data on their, as part of their brand, you know, they want to make sure that you're protecting that data. So, you know, meeting the requirements set out by those organizations, whether it's, you know, legal requirements or legislation around privacy or any other regulatory requirement, if you're in critical infrastructure, for example, with NERC or others, meeting those requirements, you know, in order to operate your business is part of that, of course. Maintaining trust. I think this is a really, really important one that we kind of lose sight of a lot of the time. In organizations, particularly as practitioners or technologists in our organizations, you know, our goal tends to be focused on a very small part or a very specific part of the operation of that business. And so what we have to try to remember is that key role that we play, however small or whatever component of the operation that is, ultimately is to serve some kind of larger, bigger picture, right? So whether it's supporting healthcare with a healthcare application or infrastructure of some kind, or it's supporting someone that wants to ride share with Uber, or you know, whatever that looks like, ultimately the business objective, we're trying to maintain trust with the regulators that are ensuring that we're, you know, delivering those services or achieving those business objectives securely, and also with our clients and our consumers and the people that we're working with. You know, how many of you have heard of an organization that experiences a credit card breach and you say, I'm never going back there again, right? This is the sort of stuff that we want to try and avoid. Improving security posture. So although compliance can often feel like a burden, it's something that we have to force ourselves to do. We have to provide all this evidence and go through this process every year or every interval. Ultimately, the goal of those standards is to improve the security posture of your organization and make your organization more secure. And then finally, facilitate business operations. Again, a really important one. I'm a big believer that compliance standards and frameworks can actually be a bridge with the business, which is often a void that gets very hard for us to build a bridge across between security and business objectives, you know, to help the business understand why it is what we do. Why do you pay our salaries, right? It's so that we can help facilitate business operations. So things like compliance programs like PCI, for example, or ISO 27001, sort of give us some meat on the bone to say, you know, we do these things to ensure that we can operate our business in a way that's secure and safe and protects our assets. So some challenges and some perceptions. I've been kind of talking about this all the way through my intro here, but you know, oftentimes we get this perception that, oh no, brace yourselves, compliance is coming, right? Our PCI audit's coming up, our ISO audit's coming up. We got to get ready. We got to collect our evidence. We got to ensure that everything is in good shape. And what this means is, you know, some of the challenges around these programs is that controls are often not maintained or baked into the security program. It's something we do leading up to the audit. It's something we stop doing once the audit is complete. In some cases, we only do it for the sake of that audit. We don't actually look at how could this positively improve our program, or what are some of the benefits or the objective of that control that's in the compliance framework. The objective, like I just mentioned, of the control is not really considered. So what we're going to do today, actually, when I get into some of the specifics, will be, why does PCI ask you to have a 12-character password, as an example? Or why does ISO say that there has to be leadership engagement? Just talking about some of the actual objectives and outcomes from those controls. Compliance really becomes a checklist activity. I can't tell you how many times I get into an interview with a system admin and I'm like, hey, what's the OS on that device? And they'll literally just say OS, number, patch version, patch revision, etc. Is this patch within 30 days? Yes. And it's a very trained and limited response. And all they're trying to do is make sure that for the sake of that audit or that assessment, they're just achieving those check marks so that this can be over and I can go back to my cave and not have to talk to an auditor ever again. And then finally, maintaining compliance is resource intensive. So I'm not sure what your experience has been, but in any of the cases where I've been consulting, so more on the internal security assessor, ISA side of the PCI stuff, when I'm supporting an organization preparing for an audit, they're pulling in everybody from all these different teams, and operational stuff sort of gets put to the wayside to focus on the audit or the assessment. And so that's kind of the perception, is that now we have to buckle down and focus on getting this stuff done right now so that we're ready for the audit when it comes around the corner. Just like nods or shakes of your head. Does this resonate? Does this sound about right for anybody that's gone through this process before? Yeah, lots of nods, no shakes? Okay, cool. Great, okay. So I love this picture on the left because a lot of my QSA experiences, or my experiences as a QSA, have been something like this, right? We look at the version, when I do my PCI audits, we're very thorough. So we'll do a screen share, we'll get onto a VM or an EC2 instance or a VM in the cloud, and we'll say, let's pull up the version of the OS on this device, and let's pull up the patch history. And it was patched the day before I got there, right? So these are the kinds of things that we run into. And of course, for anybody here that's not subject to any kind of compliance, the one on the right there is probably a bit more relevant, right? We can't be non-compliant if we've never been assessed, right? That's kind of the idea. Yeah. In terms of benefits of compliance programs, there's actually a ton of stuff that can help you out. So compliance is often all-encompassing. It's a GIF, it's gonna loop, isn't it? Oh, man. Okay, hopefully that's not too distracting for you. Compliance can often be all-encompassing. So just show of hands, has anybody here ever actually looked at the PCI data security standard before? A few? Yeah, okay. So we just had PCI version 4 that dropped on April 1st of this year. It's something to the tune of about 400 different requirements. And it covers 12 functional areas around networking, operating systems, password access management, identity access management, logging, NTP protocol, you name it. There is stuff in there that can help with that. So sometimes, in some cases, these compliance frameworks can really touch on all the different things in your environment, maybe even things that you've overlooked. When maintained proactively, organizations that are more compliance forward demonstrate a higher level of security maturity. And that's actually my experience speaking. So organizations that adopt PCI in our PCI audits as sort of the minimum viable standard for their security practices, when we go in there, they're not pulling people from teams to try and get this stuff together ahead of my visit. They just do it. It's just part of their culture. It's part of their existence as a security team. And so what ends up happening is we go in and they're like, yep, here's John. John, tell us what you do. He's like, I patch the systems. We do it every 30 days. Here's the log. And that's it. It's like a 10-minute interview and we're in and out and it's very simple. So, that compliance forward mentality is very important. Compliance often has defined security objective. So whether it's security governance or protecting cardholder data. So ISO actually is a really good example where the purpose of ISO 27001 is to create a scenario where your organization is required to have a consistent cyclical process for reviewing information security in the organization. So rather than here's all our policies, we produce them and we'll go back and look at them again later, it becomes this cyclical event that's sort of always evolving, evolves with the needs of the business, involves leadership, has a review process, has a process for identifying nonconformities and addressing them, all these things. And so the objectives of that are ultimately to make your organization more secure and more diligent in the way that you handle information security governance. And then finally, compliance standards are measurable. One of my favorite things about PCI is there's no subjectivity, really. It's either you're compliant to this very prescriptive requirement or you're not. It's a 0 or a 1. So it makes it a lot easier to measure that, to say, here's the things we do right and here's the things we do wrong. Okay, hopefully you guys aren't dizzy from that looping GIF there, because I didn't realize. I say GIF, sorry. I know a lot of you guys probably say GIF. But so ultimately, how can compliance improve your program or strengthen your program? So you can adopt a compliance framework as a security baseline. As a matter of fact, I encourage you to layer compliance frameworks to build your security baseline. So a lot of the controls that you'll have in place will overlap across these different frameworks and these standards. And you can sort of pick and choose and pick your flavor, right? What things are we lacking in? What areas of our program are we less mature in, or that we think we're less mature in? And we can say, hey, if it's good enough for credit card data, it's probably good enough for our stuff. Or if it's good enough to develop an information security management system under ISO, maybe that's how we should be approaching our governance. So these are the sorts of things that you can pick and choose. You can utilize the controls and requirements to strengthen areas in your program that lack maturity. I just mentioned that. So, maybe you are looking for a better way to do pen testing. Now, we do pen testing like once every 3 years. Is that enough? Well, we can have a look at PCI. We can have a look at various other compliance standards that are prescriptive about that to give you guidance and sort of be a North Star for you. And then you can use defined requirements to measure the maturity of your program and controls if you have a compliance program as sort of like your reference. So the idea is, and I'm going to show you this, like PCI, I'm a QSA, so a lot of my references are going to be PCI, sorry. In PCI, for example, new this year with the version 4 was the customized approach objective. So, there's the prescribed approach, which is thou shalt do X, Y, Z. And then the customized approach objective allows the organization to say, well, based on how we operate or based on the architecture of our environment, that doesn't really work for us. So what are we really trying to do with this requirement? And I'm going to give you some examples of that in a little bit here. So PCI DSS and ISO 27001. I asked about PCI. Has anybody here ever looked at ISO 27001 or, yeah? Okay, a few people, all right. A lot less than what I expected, to be honest, but okay. So what is PCI DSS? It's the data security standard set out by the payment card industry. So for those of you who don't know, I ran them off earlier. Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, JCB got together, formed a council, created a data security standard that says, if you're going to use our cards to process transactions, here are the things you need to do to be secure. And so it's an annual assessment, typically. Depending on the number of transactions you do, you can do a self-assessment and have it validated by a QSA like me. And then once you surpass a certain number of transactions, depending on the nature of your environment, you do a full report on compliance where someone like me comes in and goes through all of your stuff. And essentially, it's for organizations that process, store, transmit credit card data. I tell my clients there's 3 things in life that are guaranteed: death, taxes, and PCI compliance. If you interact with cardholder data, you are subject to PCI compliance. And for those of you in here that might be doing that or going, yeah, we've never done anything like that, have a look at your contract with your acquiring bank, because they indicate that you are required to do that, maintain that PCI compliance. Yeah, so that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's kind of PCI DSS. It's set out over 12 sort of functional areas here that are grouped together. So building and maintaining networks, secure networks and systems, protecting account data, maintaining vulnerability management programs, implementing strong access control measures, regularly monitoring and testing, and then also maintaining an information security policy. This kind of sounds like everything you'd want to have in your security program, no? Yeah? Yeah. So there's specific requirement areas within each of these categories that are much more specific. I'm not going to get into all of them right now because, like I said, there's 400 and some odd of them. We'd be here all day. But yeah, this sort of gives you an idea of what's included in there. Like I mentioned, there's compliance levels too. So what's great about some of these compliance frameworks and standards is when you start to dig into them, they actually have different flavors. So for example, PCI DSS talks about all these different things that you can do. If you're a retail environment that has PIN pads, what we call POI devices, point of interaction devices, where you put in your card to pay, obviously you don't have servers that are hosting payment applications. And so as a QSA, we're not going to look at the operating system version or the patch history or how you're doing vulnerability management, because that doesn't apply to those smaller devices, as an example. So I encourage you, it's not like, compliance, hiss, right? Have a look at these standards and see maybe if there's flavors of these standards that align more to the nature of your business and the things that you're doing, or maybe the areas of your program that you're trying to improve. The strengths of PCI DSS include, it's very technically focused. So if you're a practitioner, if you're a sysadmin, a network admin, a security practitioner, that's very operational. A lot of the requirements are very prescriptive and specific to what you're trying to achieve technically. It's like I said, it's broad. It covers a lot of different areas. I kind of just showed you all the different things. The requirement that I shared here was around audit logging. So as you can see, it's very specific about what it wants you to capture in your audit logs, right? User ID, type of event, date and time, success or failure, origination, and identity or name of the affected area, system, component, resource, or service. So, hey, if this is good enough for credit card data, maybe it's good enough for us, right? The PCI DSS remains current and is updated regularly. Any of those of you that are subject to PCI probably hate that, because when a new standard comes out, it gets challenging to meet some of the requirements. But like I said, if you're using this as a North Star or a guideline, it means that you're not looking at something that's a million years old, right? I love looking at some of the NIST SP 800 standards because some of them are like 2012, 2015, right? And they don't actually, they're not actually kept up to snuff in some cases. But yeah, PCI DSS always tries to stay abreast of the latest technologies. There's a lot of supporting documentation for PCI in open source documentation from the perspective of the community. Everybody has the same headaches with the requirements, so the PCI compliance Reddit thread is a ton of fun to read. I love going in there and reading it in my spare time. And yeah, the council actually releases a whole bunch of stuff. So not only do they give you this 600-page document with the data security standard, they also release FAQs, information supplements, all this kind of stuff. So the way I look at it is from a perspective of an organization that doesn't handle cardholder data but wants to have a more secure organization and a better security program. Here's a guide on what looks good for credit cards, and here's a bunch of supporting information on how to get there. Being able to cherry pick and pick and choose from that what makes sense is a great way to kind of navigate some of those challenges around technical controls and improving that security. Okay, ISO 27001. So it's a security standard with a set of requirements that helps you establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve an information security management system for your organization. So the idea behind ISO 27001 is less control focus and more governance focus. Now there is an accompanying standard, which is 27002, which is much more control focused. You could pick from that one if you want to. I chose PCI for the sake of my presentation here. And it's very well recognized. It's very rigorous. So I included the table of contents here that kind of talks about all the things: leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, improvement. So again, all of these different areas from a governance perspective that help you build and maintain an information security program in your organization that is kept healthy and continually improved. Some of the strengths for ISO 27001 is it's strategically focused, as I mentioned. So for any of you that are managing an information security program, or any of you that are trying to or tasked with sort of building out this governance, how do we maintain our information security program once it's in place? This is a really good way to do that. It emphasizes rigor, diligence, governance, repetition, cyclical events in terms of the analysis and assessment of that information security management system. It requires a lot of strong leadership commitment and buy-in when it's implemented effectively. So, this is a great way to bridge the gap, as I mentioned, with leaders and the business about information security and how it's a business driver and not a business inhibitor. And then finally, oh yeah, sorry, that's the last point. I kind of jumped ahead of myself there. Yeah. A couple of examples here of this. So I included the improvement section on the left-hand side, so in continual improvement. So it talks about the organization continually improving the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the information security management system, and then also how to deal with nonconformities. Like, what are things we can do to find and remediate nonconformities in our information security management system? And so if you're in the kind of environment where you've built a security program, you have a million tools like all of us have, and you're just essentially putting out fires as they come up, this might be a really great way for you to set a baseline and have a mechanism to remediate those risks and deal with them. And then on the right-hand side, speaking of risks, I included the information security risk assessment section, which talks about establishing a risk acceptance criteria, developing a risk appetite, identifying information security risks and dealing with them. So the level of risk, how do we qualify or quantify these risks, and then how do we track them and continue to improve on them? Okay, so that's enough standard stuff and screenshots from those standards for now. So how do you leverage, this is all great, Ian. You've talked about PCI, you're a PCI nerd, we get it. You've talked about ISO, you like security governance, we get it. What does this actually mean for me? What do I take away from this, and what do I apply this? How do I apply this to my program? So if I can give you one thing today to take away from this that I think is really important, is the concept of scope. Just put your hands up if you have an idea of what I mean when I say scope. Yeah, okay, good, all right, good. Okay, so scope is defined by the boundary of what's being assessed or audited. And so what we get into in the case of PCI, when we're talking about scope, is an organization has deployed assets, in the way that they deploy everything. Yeah, our server that hosts the web page for processing payments is right there in the same subnet as our app that we have, or it's in the same VLAN as our DC. I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing stuff out there. But the idea is, not really thinking about the segmentation controls or the division of those assets, technically. What's important is that this also applies at the business process or business function level too. So what I mean by that is, in this case, in the diagram, I kind of drew a little green square on 2 servers and said, yeah, there's your scope. But also considering what are the business processes that we want to include in the scope of this as well. And that's more relevant to ISO 27001. So the handling of customer data. Maybe we have an application where we have customer information, but maybe we also have a ticketing system over here where we're interacting with customers, and we want to make sure that we're maintaining the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that as well. So sort of defining that scope, depending on if you're looking at the technical level, the technical control, or the governance level, is really the most important first part. The example I can give you with PCI would be, how do we reduce that down so that the stuff we have to protect for PCI is only the stuff that pertains to our credit card information, right? If we have this app deployed on the same network as our internal corporate network, and now all of our workstations are essentially adjacent to our payment card application, that's a bad thing. That could give us a lot of vectors for compromise laterally, right? And so how do we reduce that down so that this little piece of paradise that is our cardholder data environment is separate from everything else, and that's the only view. And so applying this in the concept of your security program and applying compliance to improve that would be, okay, what things can we separate out that are the crown jewels, and we can assess or internally assess just that piece and make sure that that piece is the most important and the priority number one. And what I put here, and this is a bit of a challenging question, can we keep everything secure all the time? And that's kind of the goal for sure. But at what point do you start eating an elephant? Bit by bit, one bite at a time, right? And so if we apply this concept of scope and we say, okay, here's the crown jewels, here's the stuff that we want to focus on first, and we shrink that down and we create an environment where, this is the stuff that we're going to assess internally, and then we gradually add stuff to that scope, what you'll find is over time you've developed an environment that's much more secure. Setting baselines. So taking elements from compliance frameworks that fit your organizational needs. So this is an example, this is one of my favorites because I always get funny looks when I talk about this one. This is the PCI requirement for NTP, for time synchronization. One or more designated time servers, only the designated central time servers receives time from external sources, received from external sources based on International Atomic Time or Coordinated Universal Time. So, all very, very prescriptive stuff. But maybe you're like, well, we don't even do any time synchronization. We've never even looked at time synchronization in our environment. Well, PCI, I talked about the customized approach, is really great that way because they say, just as long as the time on all systems is accurate and consistent. That's ultimately the goal of that requirement, right? And so now you have a baseline. You can say, yeah, we've never looked at time, but maybe at a minimum, we'll do that. We'll just make sure that everything is consistent from a time perspective. Align your program to the framework in these areas. Like I said, whether it's pen testing, whether it's audit, whether it's governance, audit logging, whether it's governance, whether it's patching, whether it's identity, access management, all of these things can all come together to create your security program. And so the areas that you're lacking, cherry pick that. Grab your favorite compliance framework and pull that out as a North Star. And then what can we do that will be better than where we are now, ultimately? That's sort of the theme. What are the things that we can take away from this to improve our program? It's also useful in identifying gaps. So, hey, we've done risk assessments that give us an idea of where our risk lies and our maturity in certain areas. But looking at these frameworks as sort of a template to say, yeah, like I mentioned, if it's good enough for credit card data, maybe it's good enough for us. And so mapping your security program to that compliance framework, seeing where the gaps are, hey, we never really thought about this sort of control, maybe we should start to look into that, would be a really good way for you to get an idea of where your strengths are and where there may be gaps. Yeah, I already mentioned this, but are there things that you've completely overlooked, or areas that you're less mature, or areas where you could use some improvement? Okay, and the last part here, just conscious of the time, we're gonna have a look at a couple of the specifics. So I lied earlier when I said I didn't have any more screenshots. I do have screenshots from the PCI DSS and from ISO here. This is a really basic one that we run into as a problem most of the time in our PCI assessments. An accurate network diagram is maintained that shows all connections between the cardholder data environment and other networks, including wireless networks. Seems like a very small thing, a network diagram. But having that as sort of a baseline to say, yeah, we need to make sure that we have a network diagram that's maintained is a good idea. And what's great about the PCI DSS is on the right-hand side, there's actually some guidance, some good practices. What's the purpose of this requirement? What's the good practice look like? So all locations, clear labeling, all security controls providing segmentation, all in-scope systems, all of these things included on that diagram. And so if someone tasks you with, yeah, we need you to create a network diagram, and you're kind of making it up just based on what you know best, this is a really great way to kind of start you and give you that foundation. This is another one I wanted to share, 12.8.3. An established process is implemented for engaging third-party service providers, including proper due diligence prior to engagement. So anybody here have a TPRM program, a third-party risk management program in their organization? Yeah, not very many. So this would be a great way for you to start, right? Like what's at the very viable minimum that we should do to ensure that we're engaging third parties effectively and securely. There's even information on the purpose and the good practice, right? And the customized approach objective, again, which is sort of the broader objective of this, the capability, intent, and resources of a prospective third-party service provider to adequately protect, insert your data here, are assessed before the third-party service provider is engaged. Great. This is one from the ISO 27001 standard, so information security objectives and planning to achieve them. And so this just talks about the information security objectives of the program overall are consistent, are measurable, they take into account applicable information security requirements, they're monitored, communicated, updated, and available as documented information. So again, when we talk about what does the governance of a program include and what does good look like, ISO defines it in this way. And so you can go to the ISO standard and pull this out and say, yeah, here's how we want to try and structure the governance of our information security program. And there's lots of takeaways from that you can pull out of there. I'm starting to see some nods, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Leadership and commitment, I always go back to this. I always go back to this because I know what it's like to try and bridge that gap. I talk to execs all the time about, so what's the fine if we're not PCI compliant? Is it cheaper than paying to be PCI compliant? And helping them understand why you have to keep cardholder data secure. This is an example from ISO that talks about top management's involvement. So demonstrating leadership and commitment with respect to the information security management system by, and here's items A through H that sort of say what the role is of leadership, of top management. And so as an information security leader or someone that interfaces with the business, you can go, here's A through H that I would like you to do to help us be more secure. And again, use that as a North Star, as a guiding principle to help you be more secure. All right, pretty close to time. Any questions? There we go. Questions? Yep.
Hold on, wait for the microphone.
For PCI standards and compliance,
Yep.
who actually gives you the fine?
Yeah, great
If you're
question. So for
non-compliant.
PCI, who gives you the fine? So it's the card brands. The card brands will determine the fine. And actually, it's the card brands that do the investigation. So if you have an incident involving cardholder data, it's Visa or MasterCard that comes a knocking and wants to do that. And then they impose stricter assessment requirements on you if you do experience an incident involving cardholder data. Yep, good question. PCI specific questions are good too. I'm a QSA. I know we're like, the sickly, but this is an opportunity for you to ask me if you have a PCI question. That's no problem.
So I have two questions. The first part is as a startup or a high velocity product company. So a lot of times these standards get overlooked. And what is sort of like a baseline that I'm a DevOps engineer, so I can convince my leadership that, hey, this is the things that you absolutely need to do. So if we want to get certified in future. And the second part is if we use a third-party card, like a payment integrator, like for example Stripe.
Yep.
So we are not storing the cardholders' data at all. So what are the from PCI perspective, what are the things that we need to do?
Great. Okay, good question. So I would say in the first part, as far as being a startup and the cart and horse effect of when do we achieve a compliance standard versus focusing on our development and things. Like I've been there, I built Boaster.on, I was literally quit my full-time job and I was employee number 2 to do that. And that is a challenge. What I would say, maybe without a hard and fast rule, what I would say is at some point that critical customer that can make or break your business will come to you and want to buy your product, and they're going to ask you for that. Whether it's a CAIQ or something else from the CSA star or the CCM, for example, or whether it's a PCI compliance or something along those lines, you're going to have to do that. So do it at some point. All the variables involved with startup landia, there's not really a hard and fast rule, but you do have to do it. Yeah, it's pay me now or pay me later. You either do it in the beginning or you do it when that big customer comes along. And then the second question, I outsource my payment. What's my responsibility from a PCI perspective? PCI, compliance, and credit card data are mutually exclusive. You can't have one without the other. So even if you're using a third-party service provider like Stripe, like Moneris Checkout, or any one of these other payment gateways, you're still subject to PCI compliance. Your scope is the web server that serves up the page with the iframe. That web server is your scope. And then you would want to make sure that that has adequate segmentation controls to keep it away from everything else. Additionally, in requirement 12, the governance aspects of PCI. So we have a list of third-party service providers. We get their AOCs every year. We have an information security policy, these sorts of things. The merchant, the person that's receiving the money for the card transaction is still subject to some of those PCI requirements. And depending on the number of transactions, that's typically an SAQ type A, if you wanted to reference that to see what those requirements were. Great. Any other questions about compliance or PCI or ISO? Okay.